Okay, so good evening, everyone. My name is Schaumloeffel. I'm from the Barbados Language Centre, Barbados Community College, and we are here today to present our series that was launched last week. The series Brazil, 200 Years of Independence, History, Language and Culture. And this week I will present, and the topic of this week is Brazil, geography, history, demographics, culture, and other aspects. It's a general introduction to Brazil for people that don't know that much about Brazil, that would like to know more. And this is what this series is all about. It's discussing Brazil in light of its 200 years of independence and learning more about Brazil. This is a series that will take place every week on Thursdays at 6 p.m. So next week we will have, obviously, another session. Today, I'd like to start with you all with a little game, and a little game called Kahoot. So you can join that game, and you can answer questions. And I would like to know how much you already know about Brazil. So I will launch this game. You can use the device you are using right now, the computer, or if you have an additional cell phone or something like that, you can use a second device to play Kahoot. And let's see what your answers will be. And based on those answers, we will go through this presentation to learn more about Brazil. So to play Kahoot, we have to do the following. I will start the game here. And just a second. You have to go to kahoot.it, as you see there, and use the PIN code 315337. So go to that address, kahoot.it, and use that PIN code to join the game. I see already Kayla is there joining the game. I'll give you all another 2 or 3 minutes. And then we will start the game, and let's see what your answers will be. Charlotte is there as well. If you are afraid that you will answer a lot of things wrong, you can even give you a fictional name, okay? Don't worry. We already have 4 people there. Karen and Elaine also joined. Let's see, more people are joining the session. Second. Okay.
What's the Kahoot ID?
Just a second, I will come back and show I'm a bit here. The pin is here, 315337. Or there is a QR code there. Okay, 1 minute more, and then I will start the game. Okay, so I will launch the game, and you will see questions and possible answers, and try to choose the answer you judge to be correct, okay? Basics on Brazil. Let's start. 5 seconds left to give an answer. So, as you see, correct answer is Brazil is about 50% of the territory of South America. 2 people got it right. Let's go to the next question. Five seconds. Oh, okay. Majority got it right. So the official language of Brazil is Portuguese. I will come to details later to answer all those questions, okay? Next question. And we get the ranking here. So people answering, they will get points. And the faster you answer correctly, the more points you get, okay? Is this true or false? It is actually true. Brazil has about even a bit more than 210 million people. Next question. Correct. So the majority got it correct. So the biggest ethnic group in Brazil is mixed Afro Brazilians. Next question. That should be easy. Okay, all got it right. So I will not even comment on that. I will come to it back to it later. Okay. The current Brazilian capital is called Brasilia. Somebody answered Rio. That was correct until 1960 because Rio was the capital of Brazil, previous capital of Brazil until 1960. Okay, everyone got it correct. The majority of Brazilians are Catholics. Correct. So the soap operas, the telenovelas, they are an important part of Brazilian culture. We even will talk about that today, and also we probably will have a special session on Brazilian telenovelas. So that shows they are very important for Brazilian culture. Correct. Brazil produces airplanes, passenger airplanes, and military airplanes. And now we come to the last question, the last chance to win. Okay, yes, true. Brazil won the World Cup 5 times. It is the only country that participated in all World Cups. So let's see who got the medals in this competition. Okay, there we go. That is the ranking. Congratulations to you all. Okay, so why did I do that? I played this little game, Kahoot with you, as a general introduction, and you can see by the answers that probably already learned something, or you are showing us that you already know a lot about Brazil. So let's go to my presentation today on Brazil. So a general introduction on Brazil. So the first question I asked, how big is Brazil in South America? If we look at the map, we can see more or less that Brazil is half of South America in terms of territory size. In fact, more precisely, 49.5% of South America is Brazil, more or less 50%, as you saw in the quiz. Population, that was another question, right? So currently, the estimates of 2022 is that we are 214 million Brazilians. And if you check the population, the whole population of South America, 434, it is also roughly 50% of population of South America. When it comes to the economy, the Brazilian economy, the size of it is 3.85 trillion US. This is an estimation for this year, whereas the rest of South America is 3.76, which shows that the Brazilian economy is bigger than all other countries in South America combined. Analyzing Brazil's GDP, in 2014, Brazil, and so the so-called ranking of GDP by country, and those are numbers from the World Bank, Brazil ranked number 7 in the world in terms of GDP. And now the last number available by World Bank is 2021. Brazil is number 12 in the world. Why did this happen? Because it's not that the Brazilian economy shrunk a lot. No, it's because there was devaluation in our real, the Brazilian currency, and the GDP is calculated in US dollars. So therefore, Brazil is currently number 12. So it's the 12th biggest GDP in the world. I would like you now to give a little glimpse on history. We will have several seminars here in this series on history, where we will look specifically at moments in history that are important for us to analyze. But I would like to give you an overview on what are the important, so to say, landmarks in Brazilian history. As you know, Brazil was colonized by the Portuguese, and that is when history started being written. But obviously, Brazil had a history long before the Portuguese arrived on our shores. The Amerindians were there, and the Amerindians as you probably know, they are not a single group. They had 400 different languages, for example, and they were totally diverse. So they had different groups of Amerindians in Brazil when the colonizers, the Portuguese, arrived in Brazil. When did they arrive? That was in 1500. A guy called Pedro Álvares Cabral, he arrives in Brazil, and at the beginning, the Portuguese do not even realize that Brazil was on a continent, and they thought they would be arriving at an island. And that is why the first name of Brazil, when the Portuguese arrived in April 1500, was Ilha de Vera Cruz, the island of the True Cross, because they thought they were arriving at some island. So the first name, funnily enough, that the Portuguese gave to Brazil was island of the True Cross. So colonization started. A lot of important things happened, obviously, during this period. As you know, the same fate as in the Caribbean, for example, the same colonization pattern with enslavement of Africans to work in sugarcane plantations, mainly later in Brazil, in the case of Brazil, also in coffee plantations and different economic activities. And the colonization of Brazil started in the northeast of Brazil. And the first capital of Brazil was Salvador da Bahia in the northeast of Brazil, where the same colonization by the Portuguese started. And in 1763, the capital was changed. So Salvador was no longer capital. Rio de Janeiro became the capital until, as I mentioned in the game, 1960. Another important moment, a turning point in Brazilian history is 1808. That is when the Portuguese court, they had to flee from Napoleon in Europe, and they decided to move to Brazil. And then Rio de Janeiro becomes the capital of the Portuguese Empire, and that lasted until 1821. It is the only time in history where a colonizing country has the capital of its empire in the colony. So Rio de Janeiro, which was in the colony, obviously at the time, was the capital of the Portuguese Empire for a few years until the royal court returned in 1821 to Portugal when conditions allowed it. A year later, Brazil declares independence. We will come to those details later when we talk about the Brazilian independence. When Dr. Russia, in 3 or 4 weeks' time, she will present all the movements and everything that happened in Brazilian history prior to the independence, and later she will also talk what happened in Brazil after the independence. Let me just, somebody is trying to access. Yeah, let me allow them to come in. So Dr. Russia will talk about that, about the Brazilian history, and we will understand the independence and the context that led to the independence of Brazil in 1822. So I will not detail that. We will have enough time to talk about that. Brazil becomes, in 1822, the son of the Portuguese king, the Emperor Dom Pedro I, becomes emperor in Brazil. And Brazil has an emperor, and it's a monarchy. And only in 1889, the monarchy in Brazil was overthrown. But Brazil was then already independent since 1822. And in 1889, Brazil becomes a republic. Okay, obviously this is a very brief, summarized history of Brazil. There are a lot more important moments and details that you should understand, but today I'm just giving you a glimpse about Brazil, and this is a glimpse about Brazilian history, so I'm just giving you a few points here, okay? Another important thing that happened in Brazil that is significant is 1964, when there is a military coup. And the democracy of Brazil is removed, and the military installed a dictatorship. And this was a dictatorship that lasted for 21 years, where we had no democracy and no right to elect our president. So, and exactly that is what happened in 1985, after a lot of civil movements, protests on the street, and difficulties, and also economic difficulties, and all sorts of issues. Brazil returns to democracy. The first president was not elected by the people, but the second was in 1989. And since then, we have democratic elections and a democratic system working in Brazil again. Okay, so now Brazil is huge, as you saw. It's 50% of South America. And you may think we have all those countries in South America that speak Spanish: Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, and so on and so forth. If you imagine that the 27 states of Brazil would have become countries, we would have 27 different countries speaking Portuguese in South America. But Brazil remained as one, but it's divided in 27 states. And the colors we have there, they represent how we divide Brazil into different regions, okay? The blue, which includes the two big states of Amazonas, AM, and PA, Pará, they are what we call the northern region. So the north, we call it, okay? The green states, its biggest state is Bahia, and this is where Salvador is, that I mentioned earlier. In the state of Bahia, the BA here, this is the northeast region, so we call it simply northeast. Then we have the center west of Brazil, which are the states of Goiás, Mato Grosso, and Mato Grosso do Sul. Then we have the southeast of Brazil, which includes the states São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Minas Gerais, and Espírito Santo. And we have the south of Brazil in red here, which covers countries, or the states of, from the bottom, Rio Grande do Sul, Santa Catarina, and Paraná. For us to have an idea on how big Brazil really is, we can have a look at this and look at it carefully. So look how many countries can fit in Brazil. From gigantic Mongolia that covers the Amazon region, yet the state of Amazonas, to tiny Switzerland, or even like Brasilia, the capital is about the size of Trinidad and Tobago here from our area. If you look in the north, somehow my pointer is not showing up by you. I guess it's showing up by me, but I think it's not showing up by you, or is it? It is. So if you look in the north, we have the state of Roraima here, and Roraima, just the state of Roraima, which is a small state in Brazil, is the size of Guyana. And here in the Caribbean, people usually mention Guyana as a big country. Okay, so this is just for you to have an idea about the dimensions of Brazil. I will also bring you something from my childhood, when I was in probably end of primary school. My geography had something very similar to what I found here. And this is an old scanning of a school book, of a geography school book in Brazil. And I remember seeing this when I was in school, where they would put all the countries of Europe in Brazil, except Russia, because Russia is partially European, and the biggest part of it is Asia, obviously. And they would say, the teacher would say, look at this map. This is Brazil, and all European countries can fit in it, and there are a lot of blank spaces left to cover. So Europe is smaller than Brazil, the teacher would say, to impress us. And I'm trying to impress you all here today as well, doing it like my geography teacher in the past. When it comes to demographics, so the people of Brazil, what are the main ethnic groups in Brazil? Obviously, the original indigenous population of Brazil, the Amerindians, they are an important part, although today they are the minority. We will come to some numbers a bit later. So the Amerindians, the original people living in the area where Brazil is today, and then obviously the colonizers, the Portuguese came, and the Portuguese started the horrific slavery system and the colonial system, and brought in Africans. I don't have to tell you much about that. You know this so well from the Caribbean as well. And later, when slavery was abolished, Brazil started a policy to bring in people from other parts of the world for several different reasons. One of them, it is claimed, it was to whitening the population, and the other is also settling down people in areas, especially in the south of Brazil, where Brazil had not a very strong presence, and it still was like a dispute between Brazil and Spain for the areas where today is Argentina, Uruguay, and southern Brazil. So they brought in a lot of immigrants from Europe. This was, for example, the case of my ancestors. I'm a German descendant in Brazil, but more than Germans, we had Italians come to Brazil. We had people from all over the world, and as you may know, also Japanese. The biggest Japanese community outside of Japan around the world is in Brazil, and obviously the biggest. Brazil is the second biggest black country in the world after Nigeria. Okay. So Brazil is a big melting pot of different ethnic groups. This is also portrayed, for example, this is just a random picture of a model agency in Brazil. I always say, and I tell my students, you know, depending where you come from, it's easy when you are traveling to identify that somebody may be from your country because of this or that way people look or dress. As for us Brazilians, it's very difficult to say that, because anyone from Japanese looking to black to blonde to brunette or so can be a Brazilian. So it is very hard to tell if someone is a Brazilian unless they open their mouth, and then from the accent you obviously will know if they are Brazilians or not. But anything is possible in Brazil. This is just a little glimpse on a DNA study that was done, but look, DNA does not indicate necessarily how a person will look like or its descendants. But as you see, if you analyze the DNA of Brazilians, the biggest amount of DNA is of European origin, and then of African origin, and then of Native American. But if you look really at the distribution, you will see in the north of Brazil, in terms of the Native Americans, the Amerindians, they have the highest percentage in the north of Brazil. If you look at the Africans, the highest percentage of African DNA in people is in the northeast of Brazil, exactly where colonization started. And if you look at the south of Brazil, almost 80% of the DNA is of European origin, also for the same reasons I mentioned. But that does not mean the DNA does not mean ethnic group, obviously. This is a division I'm presenting here from the Brazil Statistics Bureau from 2010, from the census of 2010. We right now have a census going on in Brazil as I speak, and we will have more precise data soon, I guess. But what we have from 2010 is people declare themselves, they are asked the question, what is, to what ethnic group you belong to? And this is also very relative, because somebody can be Afro-Brazilian and identify as white, or the other way around. But what people answered is this, like almost 48% told in the census that they are white. This now is a term that I did not translate, because this is how the Statistics Bureau of Brazil uses it. Pardo is mixed or brown color, okay? So 43% identify as mixed Afro-Brazilian. Also, this is relative, okay? So we know historically more and more people, because of different policies, awareness, and all of that, are identifying themselves as Afro-Brazilians compared to the past, when people would tend to tell that they are white because of all the stigma, discrimination, and all that we all know so well that exists all over the place. Not just in Brazil, of course. 7.6% identify themselves as blacks in Brazil, 1% as Asians, East Asians, and 0.5% as indigenous people or Amerindians. Okay? Now, if you look at the same population, how this population is distributed, we'll see that the darker the color, more people live in that area. And the lighter the blue color, the more sparsely are people divided in those states. If you look at the northern part of Brazil, you see that we have less people living there, also because you have the big Amazon region, and it is here along the coast from where colonization started in the northeast of Brazil, along the coast down to São Paulo and Rio, which are the biggest metropolitan areas of Brazil, and down the south of Brazil, that the vast majority of the population is distributed. This is obvious. This is an obvious take, because if you look at the map, you will see that around here is where the coast is, and in the past, the way of arriving to Brazil from other continents was via the sea. So remember, airplanes are not around that long. It's just a bit over 100 years that we have airplanes. So ship was the mode of transportation for immigrants to arrive. And that is also why we get the vast majority of the population of Brazil still in the area relatively close to coast. More people joining. Let me get them. Okay, now you might be surprised to learn that Brazil, I come from the south of Brazil, okay, which is down here in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. If you want to fly up to the state of Roraima that I mentioned earlier, which is at the border of Guyana, you will have to fly about 6 hours, okay? And as you can imagine, this is from north to south, and the further south you go, in this case, in the south of the planet, of the hemisphere, the colder it gets. So that is also why we have different climates. I played around with Google Maps the other day, and I measured a point here in the north of Brazil, which is considered the most northern point of Brazil. And it is, in fact, closer the north of Brazil to the south of Canada than to the south of Brazil. So I have to put that in perspective, okay? The south of Canada is closer to the north of Brazil than the north of Brazil is to the south of Brazil, okay? I always joke with my students, telling them that the Amazon is here, so it's far away from me, it's closer to Barbados. So I tell them, you guys should know more about the Amazon than I do, because you are closer to the Amazon, okay? And that also has an implication on different types of climate in Brazil. You have in the north of Brazil a typical rainforest climate where it rains every day, it's very humid, it's very hot. And then you get, like in the northeast of Brazil, you get areas that the climate is very similar to Barbados, or a bit cooler than Barbados if you go further south. There are even some areas here in the northeast of Brazil that we call the Brazilian Caribbean. Okay, so it's very similar to what we find here. But also in the south of Brazil, in the winter, we can have snow. So this can be very cold, sometimes -5 degrees or something like that. So right now, it is winter in southern Brazil. And when I had summer holidays here, I would go down to Brazil in July or August. It is cold there. in the south of Brazil because it is winter. We don't have snow or so like Canada or Northern Europe. We have episodes of snow, but it melts very fast because usually during the day when the sun comes out, the temperature rises above 0 degrees Celsius and then the snow melts, so we don't have snow for days. But we have episodes of snow and very cold climate in the winter in Brazil. Okay, let's go ahead. When it comes to the economy, Brazil has a very diverse economy. But again, if you look at the map, you see that the distribution of the vast majority of the economic activity is also where the majority of the population is. Brazil is big in commodities. So Brazil produces a lot of sugarcane, a lot of coffee, a lot of soybeans, cotton, and also in mining. Brazil is one of the biggest iron ore producers in the world, for example, like manganese and bauxite, and so on. We have big industries in food processing, actually. And as you saw in the quiz, Brazil produces airplanes. We actually do not really depend as a country on importation, okay? We are more or less self-sufficient when it comes to food and production. Like, for example, cars. You only import a car in Brazil if you want a fancy imported car, because we produce our own cars, obviously, some European brands, some Asian brands, but they are all produced in Brazil. Even one example we got here in Barbados, you have the famous Marco Polo buses and the bus car buses that are imported from Brazil. So we produce, we have all imaginable industries in Brazil. So the economy is self-sufficient. Also, we produce a lot of crude oil as well. And that's more or less the imports of Brazil are additional, but not really vital, so to say, as it is for example, small economies in the Caribbean, where we rely on importation of food and other goods. Okay, so Brazil is also known for having social issues and a big gap between people that are rich or haves and the have-nots. One of the legendary pictures that illustrates that is you have, for example, a shanty town with a lot of people living here on the left of this picture, whereas the haves have like fancy apartments, one per floor with their own swimming pool and so on. So this is just a picture that illustrates the divide. So there still is a gap between the haves and the have-nots. But what is also interesting is noticing that in the last years, there was a dramatic change, especially in the first decade of the 2000s, okay? And this is according to Jornal da Globo, a night magazine, news magazine in Brazil on TV. They showed that. So you have the division of the middle class, and the title here they presented on TV is called the middle class boom, and you would see the middle class, which is called the class C. And in 2005, 62 million people belong to middle class here. Okay, but just 5 years later, about half the population belonged to middle class in Brazil. So it was about 102 million people. Okay. There was also a change in the last few years now, next decade here that we are living right now. And I can guess from the social economic factors. And so the middle class is now again a bit smaller for different reasons that we may discuss later. Okay, so when it comes to religion, that was also one of the questions in the quiz at the beginning of the session. The Roman Catholics are the largest denomination in the country. That's a bit less than 70% of Brazilian population that are Catholics, and with that, Brazil is actually the largest Catholic country or community in the world. This map shows a little bit the distribution of Catholics in Brazil, just for you to see that there are some states here that are like the darker, the more Catholics in those states. And you see there are some states here that are not even red, they are kind of pinkish here, and that includes, or even becoming bluish like Rio, and then São Paulo, Espírito Santo, and some states in the north of Brazil. That shows an advance of evangelicals in Brazil. So evangelicals in Brazil are on the rise. So we get more and more evangelicals in Brazil. What is also interesting in terms of culture and for you here in the Caribbean is we have Afro-Brazilian religions. And Afro-Brazilian religions, they worship the orishas, so the deities. And there are different types of Afro-Brazilian religions. That's why they're called Afro-Brazilian religions. There is a general term that we call macumba for religions. And then there is candomblé, which is based on deities and anima of nature and offerings of sacrifices of the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms, healing, dancing, trance, percussion. We will come to details of that. We'll have a session dedicated just to religion to analyze that. What is also interesting is syncretism. Syncretism is when more than one type of belief or religion come together and form a new one, and Umbanda is one of those. It is a blend of African religion with Catholic tradition, Spiritism, and some indigenous traditions. Okay. And then there is also Kimbanda, which may involve magic and rituals, sacrifice, and so on. Okay. Another thing that is important to at least have a brief idea about when it comes to Brazilian culture and Brazil as a whole is obviously football. And football is our national sport. This was another question we had today in the quiz. And I say football in Brazil is madness. And I call it madness because people can be very fanatic about football, can be very passionate about football, and sometimes to the point that big fights or family fights because one is a fan of one team, the other is a fan of another team. And when Brazil plays the World Cup, for example, the whole country stops because everyone wants to watch Brazil playing. But Brazil is football is not just madness; it's also big business. It involves a lot of money. The picture on the right here was not chosen casually. This is my team. My team is called Grêmio Porto Alegre. Grêmio Porto Alegre at some point was the world champion of teams in the world, obviously. 3 times Libertadores, South American champion, multiple national championships. And now, last year, Grêmio was relegated to the second league. They're playing right now the second league and trying to make a comeback to the first division next year. But why I'm saying all this is just to give you an idea why football is big business. My team, Grêmio Porto Alegre, even being in the second division, okay, in League B, they have a budget, a monthly budget of 10 million reais. 10 million reais is more or less $2 million US dollars. Okay, $2 million US dollars per month just to pay to run the team. That includes salaries, stadium, and all that. Okay, and Grêmio is by far, this is just an example because I'm a fan of Grêmio. Grêmio is by far not the biggest team in Brazil. There are bigger teams like Flamengo, Corinthians, and so on that have much bigger budgets. So a lot of money is involved, and football is obviously big on TV. every Wednesday, every weekend, you can watch live games. Uh, and people go stream to the stadiums to watch football. It's really big business in Brazil. And football also has a social function. Uh, Again, we will come to that when today we discuss football. But briefly, why do I say it has a social function? Because football acts as an escape from reality. It can be a form of leisure. Okay, it can have several social functions that we will discuss later. And here I portray also on the right the biggest footballer of all times. Somebody knows who that is? Can somebody answer that? Who is the biggest footballer of all times?
Pelé.
Nah, Pelé. But this is not Pelé in the picture, though. Pelé is the biggest footballer of all times when it comes to males. This is Marta.
Minha fã, Marta. Marta, a formiga é boa também.
Yeah, so this is Marta, and Marta got the golden ball, I think they call it. So the prize of biggest football player of the year more times than Messi, for example. Okay, so she's the only one I believe that got it 8 times in a row. So this is the biggest footballer of all times in the world. This is Marta. Obviously, we will not discuss that, but this Pelé and not Maradona, the biggest male footballer of all times. As I mentioned this as well, telenovelas. So the Brazilian soap operas, we even have a special name for them. They are not called soap operas because telenovelas, and we will discuss telenovelas later as well, they have a special format and they are different from soap operas. And telenovelas are a national obsession. Brazilians watch telenovelas usually 2 or 3 a day. The most fanatic people watch even 4 or 5 a day. And they are a daily show from Monday to Saturday. Okay. And every day, a new chapter, it involves a lot of production, obviously, a lot of advertising, and therefore, like football, telenovelas also are big business in Brazil. Usually, a chapter of a top quality telenovela costs about $1 million per chapter. Okay, produce it. So you can imagine this is big business, and people big companies advertise in telenovelas and during the breaks, so it generates a lot of money. And telenovelas are also a sign of the power of media in Brazil. We will discuss this. We can see how telenovelas can influence people and the way people behave, the way people think, and also how people can influence the telenovela itself. This is something interesting. So it is a dual way thing. People influence how telenovelas work, and telenovelas influence how people work, so to say, how people act, behave, and sometimes even think. Okay. But not leave that this presentation without talking about Brazil, the land of carnival. I should rather say that Brazil is the land of carnivals. We'll come to this a bit later now. Carnival in Brazil is obviously an expression of the cultural diversity of Brazil, because, as I said, we have carnivals, different types of carnival in different areas of Brazil. And like football and like telenovela, carnival is also big business. It involves a lot of money, a lot of preparation, and it is a big industry that employs a lot of people that prepare the carnival. Carnival in Brazil is always 40 days before Easter. It's like it is in Trinidad, okay? So people start preparation for the next carnival as soon as one carnival is over. So they start preparing for the next year. And the industry of carnival permanently employs people. So it is also big business. And like football and telenovela, it also has a social function. Um, we will again come to that later, all the details to that, when we will talk about carnival. But I guess you can imagine what the social function of carnival already is, right? Um, of entertaining people, of holding people together, of creating a cultural identity, etc., etc. Uh, Carnival is so big in Brazil that in some areas we even have the so-called special stadiums for Carnival, so-called sambodromes. The famous Sambodrome of Rio, Sambodrome we call it. It's about a mile long, and it works especially for the parade, and it's completely different from the street carnival. It is really a parade where different samba schools compete. It is like almost like a football championship where a samba school can be the champion or can be relegated to the second division of the samba schools. They get a prize and all that. So we even have special stadiums for that. And this is more a type of carnival that people usually abroad know. Okay. That is what you would see on TV, the parades of Rio, for example, perhaps from Sao Paulo. But there is much more to it in Brazilian Carnival than those parades. Okay. So you see here a samba school dancing, and you also see the other picture is a type of carnival, which is a street carnival with a truck with a band on top, and this is in Salvador da Bahia. So there is a stretch along Avenue in Salvador da Bahia that is 21 kilometers long along the coast, more or less like side of Barbados from north south, and one avenue, and there are dozens of those trucks and people following them according to their preference, and they play live music. And the same day in the same avenue, you probably find over 2 million people dancing and commemorating Carnival on the street just in one city, in the city of Salvador. There we go. So I say this was just for you to give you a general idea about Brazil, an introduction. And I say muito obrigado, thank you. We will have different sessions where we will discuss different aspects. For example, next week we will have one of my former students that will present, give you the basics of the Portuguese language, teach you the basics of Portuguese language. That will be next week. The following week we will have a presentation on the Bajans that went to Brazil and see what are the links we have between Brazil and Barbados in this case, and why those Bajans decided to immigrate to Brazil. Okay, and we will have different topics. I will always announce those topics in our WhatsApp group. And now, let me finish here my presentation. And I would like to open the floor if somebody has anything to comment or to ask about today's general introduction on Brazil, or any other question in general about the series. So does someone have any question? I see Natasha has a question. Yes, go ahead, Natasha. You can open your microphone and comment or ask.
Hi, Marco. I came in a little bit late, but I was just curious, right? Regarding the districts in the different states in Brazil, how many of the states were used for slavery in terms of like plantations and other, crops? I know you mentioned tobacco and other crops that were grown. I'm just curious as how much land, how many states were used during slavery?
To be very honest, I don't know, but I can tell you more or less what I think. It's a lot of states, like especially areas like in the Amazon region, Rondônia, and so they had little, but it virtually, I think, affected most of the states. But obviously, the majority of in the plantation system, and so we're along the coast, starting in the northeast of Brazil. Perhaps Dr. Rocha, Eleni Rocha, that is here, can answer that question if she knows how many states were affected. I guess virtually almost all in one way or another, as long as they existed while we had slavery in Brazil. Some of them did not even exist by then. Yeah.
Every state, each one
Yes.
of them, each
Some
every
more,
one
some less. Yes.
state of Brazil used enslaved work. Some used more indigenous slaves, like the case of Amazon or Rondônia or Acre, but every state had African slaves as well, each one of them.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I see Paul Blackman wants to ask some question as well.
Hi, good evening all. Excellent presentation. I missed the start, Marco, but as always, we're happy as a language center to be part of the presentation. My question is linked to religion. You mentioned the sort of indigenous religions and you mentioned the Catholic religion. Are Brazilians either in one camp or the other, or do they do like some Haitians and they have both to cover all bases?
I guess it all depends on the individual you're talking about. But Brazilians in general, they are very tolerant if it comes to religion. Perhaps these days a bit less tolerant, every year a bit less for certain reasons. But I know people that say, if God is supposed to be a good thing, the more I have of it, the better. So some people can go to, let's say, an Afro-Brazilian worshiping in the morning and then to the Catholic Mass in the afternoon. They have no problem with that. So Brazil is very, very tolerant when it comes to that in general, although we have a lot of episodes of discrimination, especially against Afro-Brazilian religions for the same reason as we have racial discrimination. We also have discrimination against those types of religion as well. But I would say it obviously depends on the person. But this is perfectly possible. I know it for sure that some people say if God is supposed to be something good, the more I have of it, the better for me.
Better. Thank you.
Okay. I also see Carlos wants to say something. Carlos, your microphone is not open.
Okay. No, now you hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to compliment you on your excellent lecture, trying to cover such a wide array of subjects, and just comment on something you were talking about football, and I am a football too, and it's interesting because when I arrived in Barbados, I was trying a year ago. I was trying to learn the rules of cricket, and one of the first clubs football was played in Brazil was actually called Rio Cricket. It was created and founded by in Rio de Janeiro, actually across the bay in a small city called Niterói. The club still exists, and they play actually once a year. They also play a sport called ball, and they don't play football anymore. So there's something I still like to learn more about why cricket caught on in Barbados and Caribbean, and it didn't caught on. It was not popular in Brazil. It's something that I still want to discover because the English were actually. I discovered that they were actually playing cricket and football in many cities in Brazil. Of course, some football became very popular in Brazil and cricket no.
Yeah, that is interesting, and cricket became popular in the Caribbean, right? So, and yeah, that is interesting, and obviously this is football was also introduced by a guy called Charles Miller in Brazil, who was a Brazilian but a descendant of the English and of the British, and when he went to the UK to study, he learned about football and brought it back to Brazil. And at the beginning, the sport was called football in Brazil, the same word as in English. Now we have an adaptation, we call it futebol, which is obviously comes from football, but it's a Brazilianized word already. So Yes. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Deborah.
Yes, please. Good night, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you for a fantastic and concise presentation on Brazil. As you were going through, I was remembering the different stuff from the class that I took, and my interest in Brazilian culture and history has been rekindled. So thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. I forgot to say actually, but I think this is more or less obvious. What I gave you today is just it's impossible to talk about everything, things Brazil in an hour. So I gave you just a glimpse to have a general idea. Lots of things are not very precise. It's just like a brush over it, and it's very summarized. And I had no intention here of going deeper into different topics. We will do that later. This was also like a general introduction, as it was called. I saw Darren had his hand up. Darren, you still want to say something, or?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Marco, I really enjoyed the presentation. Forgot you're a good presenter. So good to go through that information again. You know, sometimes when you don't go through something, you tend to forget it, and it's not there to the forefront of memory. But it was a really good a review. I really enjoyed. I have a question about next week though. Next week, going to be face-to-face or online?
No, our sessions in principle will be all online, but we may plan a few of them hosted, because this is an initiative by the Embassy of Brazil in Bridgetown and the Barbados Language Centre. So we may have a few. We will discuss that still at the community college at the Barbados Language Centre. But there is no way, Darren, we will have those purely face-to-face, because I may have guests from abroad, or some people may like to attend but not face-to-face. So if we are to have any session in the Barbados Language Centre, it will be hybrid. It will be face-to-face, but also online at the same time, okay?
Okay, because I was asking because I know that Marco does some really good Brazilian food, and the churrasco is usually really. Right.
Oh, that is what you are looking for. Okay. We will talk. Actually, we will have sessions where we will talk about food. I will have a Trini guy that lives in the northeast of Brazil, talking about all the delicacies and the nice food types that we have in the northeast of Brazil. That's one session that I already have, and I will probably talk about churrasco because I come from the south of Brazil myself. So we will have a few topics on food. Perhaps I have to advise you then to eat before you come to the session, or we have to do it really face to face. Okay. Any other comments or questions? If not, so that is it from me today. All the sessions are recorded and will be later available on YouTube as well. So that is it from me today. Next week we come back and we will have a session on the basics of Portuguese. So we will learn how to say the basic expressions in Portuguese with a former student of mine, and all my former students that are here, they can join and also help Leonora in the session next week, okay? So that's it for me today. I say bye-bye and see you next week. Same place, same time. Ciao.
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 Bye-bye.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Ciao. Good night, everyone.
Chi.
Hi, that was good. Yeah, I'm sorry I missed it, but
Yeah.
I have my group at the college, and I
No
definitely
problem.
came a mile after 6. Okay, I'll be on time next week, because next week I'm interested in learning some Portuguese. Okay,
Yeah.
good show.
Okay, great.
Have a good night.
You too.
Yeah,
Thanks. Bye-bye.
yeah.